Welcome back, guys, to the Butterfly Season podcast. I have a doozy for you. My dear friend, Rebecca Cafiero, is on the podcast today. And just to preface, this is a 2-part podcast. So if you're listening to part 2, go back to part 1 because it is jam-packed with a lot. We go everywhere. But before I even hint about where we go, Rebecca is a business growth and visibility strategist. She is literally a PR maven, best-selling author, like multiple times over. She is a founder, podcaster, been in Forbes, US News, ABC News. Like, she is literally the real deal when it comes to visibility, PR, credibility, but also just in the healing space. Rebecca and I got to know each other at a mastermind that we're both in. And every year the mastermind votes for the MVP of the year. And it's a year-long mastermind. And the MVP, the voting like credentials are just based on the person who has given the most to the group. And Rebecca was a winner of that because that is her heart. She is a giver, and she has shown me so many things about spirituality and just really tapping into your higher self, right? Like just getting you so aligned on a health level, on a spiritual level. And I wanted to have her on the podcast, not to talk about PR or visibility, but really to talk about spirituality and the journey that she's been on and the evolution that I have seen her go through over the last 2 years. It is very much like start of a cocoon season, if you will, into a blooming, blossoming butterfly. And I'm excited to unpack all of that with you guys. Get ready. It is a journey. Put your seatbelts on. We are going into all of the things: psilocybin, breathwork, hypno-breathwork, past lives, genealogy, and so much more. So I hope you guys enjoy. I want to pivot just a tad bit, and it's not a full pivot, but just like explore the breadth of all that is your transformation and talk to you about past life regression. Now, as a disclaimer, when I first heard like all of these things, I was just like, these people are crazy, and had zero interest in it, any of the things. And so, but then I stumbled on TikTok. God bless TikTok. And this gal was talking about, I had initially started following, someone else was talking about, when you're creating a baby, especially a woman, you're creating their eggs also.
Yes.
And so that's like 3 different generations of
You're in your
human
grandmother's
being.
uterus.
Yep. I was in my grandmother's uterus. So whatever my grandma was going through, like if you're experiencing trauma when you're pregnant, babies might come out colicky or whatever. They actually have legitimate symptoms that are experienced what you experienced while you were creating the child.
Or being chemically addicted to cortisol. So
Right.
Think about like really high stress, like the kids just come out like unsettled and high stress. Like I had that realization when I was pregnant with my first, and I'm like, okay, this isn't just the food. Because if you think like a baby that their mom does a drug could become out, with a propensity toward addiction. But this is also like my emotions that get turned into chemicals in the body can addict my child as well.
Yes, because we actually get addicted to emotions, addicted to happiness, sadness, whatever it is, like toxic patterns. Like you actually, that like action, reward or whatever, like you become addicted to it. So when this gal said that, I was like, oh, wow. Like I had a friend who had just given birth, and prior to that was having a really traumatic experience, not with the baby, but just in her general life. And then the baby came out really colicky, and she was like, I'm just like really frustrated at myself because I know that this is why it's happening because of X, Y, and Z. And so that made it really real for me on like the generational trauma and generational curses that people say, because whatever was happening then, like think about like my grandmother, when she was giving birth to my mom, or when she gave birth to my mom, my grandmother was like working on the strawberry fields for like cents and living on like the fields as a farm worker. Like, and that was also I was there, like that was being created at that point in time when she was, you know what I mean? So think about like the generational trauma in that situation when you're basically, this is my Hispanic grandmother, like you're basically a slave at that point, right?
Well, I didn't even share this because I didn't know about the strawberry fields. So I come from the place in Oregon is a strawberry capital of the world. And my grandmother was a row boss.
Oh my gosh.
In the strawberry fields in the summer, and then in the winter she worked on a factory line as a jerky. Like she was an immigrant seventh grade
Yeah.
education. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Wow. So then once you explore something on TikTok, it'll show you more things just like that. And so there was this other gal who was talking about how in our DNA, I think we have like 17 generations inside of us, right? Like that's compiles us together. So you think 17 generations before on your mom's side and your dad's side that come together and you get a hodgepodge of those 17 on either side. And then the generations before that and people before that and people before that, all to create you in this time. And so one thing that you mentioned when you were talking about breath work was like some stuff that is mine and some stuff that isn't mine, like the shadow work, you just deal with it. Help me understand in relation to past life regression, as your experience has been, what does that mean with like lineage that I've just talked about with like the generations, creating your DNA? How have you worked through stuff that is yours or isn't yours?
Sure. So I'll start out with saying like I think what most people can accept is we look at things like a type 2 diabetes, which is a lifestyle disease. And people are like, oh, well, my parents had it, or so I'm susceptible. Well, you're like, well, you're actually only susceptible because type 2 is not something that is typically carried in genes like a type 1. You're susceptible because you probably have the eating habits that created that in your parents and you're making similar choices, right? And then we think about emotions, right? Which is, all right, if we grew up with like, again, these types of emotions created these types of situations, that becomes like our emotional home. That becomes a pattern. Like I think most people can understand those two, but then you start to think about these things that happen, these cycles that you weren't even aware of.
Right.
So I'll go back to like where this entire past life thing started with me is, well, kind of 2 points. I was working with a client who ironically came to me through him to breathwork. She was also certified in it. She'd worked with the same founder and she just followed me on social. And she was a Reiki master and did a couple other modalities, also did past life regressions. So I was working with her on her PR, her visibility. And I had gotten Reiki certified early 2020, but then literally 3 weeks after is when the pandemic happened. And Reiki, especially when you go through Reiki 2, I got 2 attunements. An attunement is, I know it sounds really crazy, like they go through this whole thing, but it like opens you up energetically and you feel a lot more. And I had always thought I was really not sensitive, but what I actually realized is I'm highly empathic. And because of trauma, I had completely shut down. Like I had shut it off. Like I like to say, like people often think they're close to me because I'm very open, but it's like I'm in like there's like a glass box. They can see through, they can see me, but I actually don't let people in. And I would keep feelings out that way. So I created, whether healthy or unhealthy, boundaries around like being able to feel other people. And so when I did Reiki, got certified, and the pandemic happened, I got really open. It was so overwhelming that I had to like consciously then like close it down. So I didn't do any Reiki in 2020.
Wow.
After
What
that,
was overwhelming about it?
Well, just I think anyone who's energetic or went down any social media rabbit holes, like the beginning of 2020 or the beginning of the pandemic was just a lot. And then imagine if you have a filter on your emotions and what you sense, and that filter is removed, and so you're just like completely opened, and then the world is just it just like was like these a lot, and it was not good a lot. It was like pain, suffering, fear, uncertainty.
Like you were feeling those feelings.
Oh, I felt them to a level I'd never felt before.
Wow.
It was like my empathic, protection was gone because the attunement like removed it, which was supposed to be a positive thing, is to make me more open to being able to tap in like life source energy, which is what Reiki is. But it did that. And it also, the negative was like, I was like, I don't even know how to handle all this in the middle of like the most intense thing we as a collective world had gone through in our lives. Right.
Yeah.
So when I met this client, this is now like, again, probably late 2021. I said, I'd really like to go back through and re-get certified, like kind of restart, clear the filter again that I like put back on. And so I went through this. Well, I was working with her. I ended up not doing that actually until 2022. Then July of 2021. So all this is kind of happening. I'm like owning my magic. Like I'm just getting more open to things. I've been introduced to breathwork, but hadn't started doing it consistently. And I had a friend that was, she's a pediatric intensive care nurse, and we were chatting, and she's like, Rebecca, I think that you have this gene that I just read about that was just discovered. And I'm like, what? She's like, well, she's like, I'm going to send you an article. It tells about the personality types of people with this gene. And it literally is exactly you. And I read the article. It was in CNN. It's like the short sleep gene. It's a gift. I read it, I'm like, holy crap, that completely sounds like me. It was like reading like a personality assessment.
Yeah.
And so I go into my 23andMe raw data and I pull up, the gene code. It's like ADRB1. And I'm like, oh, wow, I do have this. And it's 1 in 1,000.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I had it.
You never told me that.
But so it's crazy. So it's a short sleep gene. The idea is that I can function really well off of very little sleep. And I shouldn't say I've always known that. I've always done that.
Yeah.
But what I will say is I do feel that I need sleep for my hormones and I need sleep for I'd say to recharge a magical battery, even though I can logistically, I can function on very little sleep with my brain. I can do it. It's fine. But anyway, when I read this, I called my dad because I was like, okay, this is genetic, what I've gotten it from. Right. And I called my dad. I don't talk to my dad a lot. We have a great relationship. I don't talk to him that much.
Yeah.
Maybe once a month. So I called my dad and I was like, Dad, I thought about my grandmother. I was like, do you know what grandma's sleep habits were? Because my grandma was just this crazy person. She was so driven. Unfortunately, a lot of people are like, you're like your grandmother, but I'm like way more heart driven. But I remember in her 70s, she lived in Oregon. I was in Vegas. My stepmom said, I think your grandmother's driving down. I think she's going to call you to stay at your house. And I was like, I haven't even talked to grandma in 2 years. She was not the maternal type that sent cards.
Yeah.
At all. So she called me and she's like, I'm driving down from Oregon. Keep in mind, this is a 17-hour drive. And she's driving down with a trailer on the back of her truck at 70, late 70s. It's already something crazy. Well, anyway, long story short, she was late. She was supposed to get there between 9 and 10. She called me at 1. So she shows up at 1. She's been driving all day long. I here's the extra bedroom. I'm going to bed. And I got up at 5 because I had a workout. And my grandmother was already dressed and about to leave the house. 4-hour turnaround after a 17-hour drive in her mid 70s. So I just was like, my grandma must have had this. Right. So I was like, Dad, and he's like, I don't really remember. And I was talking to him. My dad's a commercial fisherman. So I'm like, well, Dad, you always got 3:30 or 4 in the morning. And maybe you have it, or maybe, I don't know if it can go through, he missed it. So we start talking. And then in that conversation, I was like, Dad, while we're talking about weird family stuff, I said, I remember hearing a conversation in high school. And I didn't remember the details. I was I remember hearing a conversation about Grandpa, his dad, being married before and you having a sister from his previous marriage. And my dad's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Mm. I went, never mind, ignore. Don't want to bring this up. So I called my mom and my parents have been divorced for 38 years. And I was like, Mom, I remember you saying something about this. I don't remember if you told me or I overheard it. My mom said, oh yeah, I mentioned it to you when you were in high school. I said, well, I asked Dad and he didn't have a clue. She's like, oh, well, he wasn't the one that told me. I'm like, well, who told you? She's like, his sister. So I call my aunt up and I'm like, Aunt Angie, I haven't talked to you in 5 years or 4 years since my grandma's funeral. But what is this this? And she's like, and I said, because my dad says he doesn't know anything about it. And she's like, well, your dad doesn't know anything about it because he wasn't on the trip where we met her. Mm. And I'm like, wait, what?
You're like, Jerry, what's happening?
Jerry. So
R.I.P. Jerry.
they were on this family trip with the 2 younger siblings who were still in the house. And it was a trip they did every year. They stopped at the same place. My grandfather disappeared for a few hours while the kids and my grandma went shopping. And that trip, they said, you're going to meet your sister. And she's like, what are you talking about? She was 13 or 14, the only girl out of 4 kids. And they're like, you have an older sister. They didn't give her any explanation. They drive up to this house. They get out. My aunt's like, I'm not going in. And my grandma apparently at one point came back into the motorhome and with this woman and is like, this is your sister Angie, but she's being a brat. And then they left. That was the only contact she ever had.
Wow.
And I asked my aunt, I said, well, then what happened after? Did they explain it? She's like, we never talked about it. So my dad didn't even know about it. Mm. And so that got me onto, I was like, well, I need to find this woman. Partly it's that I never felt like I really had a lot in common with my family members.
Yeah. So you're like, maybe this gal.
Yeah. I was like, maybe there's this connection and it was a mystery and I wanted to pull the thread. So I started doing all this genealogy, trying to find her. And I kept running into dead ends. So I would just work my way. Oh, this was the night before we were supposed to leave on a week trip to Shasta for houseboating. And the fires started. We literally get up that morning and we can't go on the trip because they basically evacuated the whole area. So I was like, well, I have a week off. I have no calls and I have my nanny because she was supposed to come with us. So I literally probably did 40 hours that week of just genealogy research. And I just dove in so deep.
When you say genealogy research, you are doing what?
Okay. So I went to ancestry.com This is not an ad for Ancestry, but there's other sites. I love
But if you
Ancestry.
want to sponsor this podcast, you can.
Sure. And I put in my information and then like my parents. And then what it does is, I mean, I think I signed up for like the all access pass, like $50 a month. And it pulls military records, religious records, hospital records. So, with my grandparents, it was pulling like stuff I'd never even seen. It pulled my grandfather's military records, like where he was stationed, his discharge paperwork, his death certificate, like obviously obituaries. His, I'm trying to think if I found some high school photos from like high school yearbook, stuff that I'd never actually seen. And then I just kept going up the tree. And typically because of census records and birth and death certificates, you can corroborate most of it. So most stuff has a physical like image or record attached. And I'll just say like, I actually am about to hit 10,000 relatives that I've uncovered.
Wow.
And now a lot of it, I always went up versus down the tree. What that means is like, I'd go up to my grandparents and it would say census. So it would fill out their siblings, but I never typically went down from there. I was always like, where can I go up? The goal was to find this sister. And I just kept running into dead end after dead end after dead end. But I was finding all this other fascinating stuff. And what would start happening is there'd be certain times like I'd find an ancestor and I would just have a feeling, like just feel really like drawn and compelled by them. And I reached out to one of my clients and she was a client of mine, but she did ancestral work and ancestral land and ancestral work. So imagine like she's a spiritual coach, like a kind of like Reiki energy, but special like healing, special like theta healing, like all of these things, there's all these modalities. And I've never met someone that only did ancestral land and genealogy work.
What does that mean, ancestral land?
I'm going to have to go back and find the notes. But basically, I think she's half Mexican, half Filipino. And so she was talking about like, but she's living in Canada. So how important, like she goes back to Mexico for a month every year because like her like literal DNA like responds to being in that place where her, like that's her birthright, right? Like where her lineage is from. And same thing with the Philippines. So part of it is like, if you're called to a certain place, different than astrocartography, which is based on your natal chart, your birth chart. You can look that up. That's really cool too. But it's this idea of like, well, have you actually been to this place? Now, a lot of us often have like trauma around where we grew up.
Yeah.
Right? But it's like going deeper than that.
It's so crazy. Really quickly before you move on. So Cam and I saw a psychic in November of last year. And she told him that California is like not his place. I think that she said Arizona was his place. Like he would always end up back here. Like for whatever reason, that's like his like thing. And he grew up in California, Northern California. And she was like, even if you ever go back, you will always want to leave.
You should also check out the astrocartography. You can just
Where?
Google.
How do I do that? I just Google it?
Google astro, ASTRO, cart, CART, ography. And then it'll have you put in his birth time, his birth date, like all the information, right? And then where he was born. And it's super interesting because I was introduced to it maybe a year and a half ago. And so I have like my whole family's chart loaded. And so I can look at like Palo Alto and what comes up there. And then like for me, I can go to Carmel. And it's interesting because like my husband's is the same in both spots. Mine is wildly different because we vacation in Carmel a lot. And then I looked at like Italy, like the specific region near Florence. And it said both me and my husband will retire there and like all this information. It's like the most beneficial spot in the world for my daughter. And it's very beneficial for my son. So I was like, all right, so we're going to Italy this summer. Our first time with our whole family. It's like my fifth time. I've gone with my husband multiple times. But yeah, so this idea is like, where are your family from? And the interesting thing is I thought I was Irish. I thought I was Irish, but I started watching like years ago. I had a hard time with the violence, but I started watching Outlander.
I have
which is like a show about like Scottish Highlands. It's like the guy in it, well, he's very cute, but he's very Scottish and like it's all filmed in Scotland. I was watching, I was just like, it literally was this weird experience that I was there. Like I had lived through, it was just very bizarre. But I'm like, this doesn't make sense. I'm not Scottish, I'm Irish. Well, I went back to my ancestry. I did my ancestry and it turned out I'm like 25% Scottish and 2% Irish. I'm heavily Scottish. So my client, though, she just basically said, when you're doing genealogy, you are like releasing karmic, I don't know, bonds, or you're doing like good karmic work for these ancestors. And so when I felt that pull of like certain threads to pull, I would just lean into that and I would spend time there. And it's been fascinating. It's just been so fascinating. And to like see that, like, and I think this is probably similar for most people, but like you can literally, be from slaves and kings.
Right. I want to talk to you about like this genealogy work. So this was last year at Pitch. No, I don't know if right before Pitch. No, it wasn't Pitch Club. Was it Pitch Club where
Yes,
we were
it was
here?
at the speaker dinner.
Yes. No,
We
before
were
that with
talking
the
at the speaker
aura
dinner and we
ring.
like got all charged
We were.
up. Mm.
The aura ring. Yes. So I did an intensive with you and your team, and it was all like buyer persona stuff. And I was looking at the aura ring to buy it. I saw that you had one, and I was using my Apple Watch at the time. And I was like, how do you like the aura ring? Because I'm thinking about swapping over from Apple Watch to aura ring. You're like, oh my God, I love it. But it's really weird. I bought 2 of them already because I thought one was broken because it's saying that I have this like severe issue with my heart.
Yes.
Tell that story in relation to
In
genealogy.
detail.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very health focused. So a little background. I lost my boyfriend to cancer 13 years ago, and my husband is a cancer survivor, and we've gone through it together twice. And I've always been just like open to like all things, personal optimization. But I have been like on this serious health journey. It started out with like, what can I learn and know that could save my person? Right. This is like 14 years ago when he got diagnosed. And then with my husband, it was like, okay, now how can I like keep him from the disease coming back? So I've gone through all the things, intermittent fasting, I'm certified in health, got like all of these things. And I practice a lot of it. I haven't drank in more than a year. I would say I'm primarily plant-based. I just started introducing meat back right before my cycle, but like I've gone through all these things and I meditate, breath work, like, right. Like literally the checklist of like, how do you be healthy? I do it all. And most of my stuff was good. My sleep is like weird only because of that short sleep gene. So my data is weird on that.
Yeah.
Which has actually updated now with the new algorithm. But I was sick. I had COVID. And I remember I sent some screen captures to one of my clients who does functional health, like diagnostic testing. And she's like, oh my God, Rebecca, your HRV literally like, I don't even know how you're alive. And I'm like, what? I never looked at that metric because it's not something I knew about, right? I was looking at things like your heart rate and your activity, your steps,
score,
right? All of these.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, maybe it's because you have COVID. And I said, well, I have almost 2 years of data. I've been tracking this since end of 2020. And I had COVID in early 2022. So she's like, well, send me back the data. And so I look back and I'm like, so my number at the time was like 6 to 8. And I look back and I was like, the highest the number ever was like 20 to 23. So little micro like session on HRV, it's heart rate variability, and it basically measures stress on the heart. And I did the Google research, which is always a mistake. And I was like, oh, wow, anything below 20 is immediate risk of heart attack or stroke. Like I should be dead. And that's what she was talking about. She's like, you are like literally like if you get to 0, you're gone. Right. And I'm at 6.
Yeah.
And healthy for like healthy young people is like 100 plus. So one of my dear friends who was, captain of the UCLA swim team, she's in her 40s, or she's still in the hundreds. My husband's is like typically 40 to 60. Like anything under 40 is like, you're probably under, 40 to 60 is like, you're not great. You're probably under a lot of stress. And so how's your heart responding? 20 to 40 is like, you're probably ill. And again, 20 and below is terrible. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh, this is really concerning. And so I ended up going and seeing a cardiologist, but what kept coming up through my genealogy as I was looking through all these death records, specific, and not just death records, but those are one of the data points, is the cause of death. And my dad's entire side, like, and we're not talking like 3 or 4 death certificates. I'm talking probably 15 or 16 that I did, because I was able to pull my grandparents, my great grandparents, and then my great, like basically I have them back into like 1880. So I have them back until my third great grandfather. They're all heart attack. They're myocardial infection. I think there was one that was like myocardial plus like tuberculosis, right? But they're all heart attack in their 60s. And I knew that my dad had open heart in his 50s, even though he's very healthy, not overweight, in great shape. Like all of his markers are amazing. My grandfather died of a heart attack in his 60s. Again, not overweight, healthy lifestyle. And his dad died. And so they've all died in their 60s of heart attack. And I I get the genetics. I get that. But like, here I am 40 years old in crazy good health. And yet this is happening. So I
Right.
talked to my cardiologist, and he, the first time I went in, he just listened. He was amazing. He did his doctorate or his thesis or whatever on HRV. So I'm like, great. Because when I called in to make an appointment, his receptionist was literally like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I'm like, my HRV is terrible. I need to see an appointment. She's like, I don't even know what HRV is. I'm like, wow, okay. This is apparently something people don't talk about. Right. But he was really interested, and he's like, yeah, he's like, I see you. You're wearing a Whoop strap. Because I got a second wearable to track the data to understand the correlation. You're wearing, this, you do all these things. So they did an EKG, and he's like, let's just see like if this just is a weird data point, but let's see what your heart looks like. They did the EKG, and he comes back, he's like, all right, this is really, I don't know if he said concerning, or I think he said like more like puzzling.
Mm-hmm.
And what he said, he's like, imagine that the human heart is like a torso. And let's just say that you're supposed to be, there's 4 chambers. So let's just say left shoulder, left hip, right hip. And it's supposed to be beating from your right shoulder to your left hip, like from one chamber to the other. He goes, yours is showing up backwards and reverse. So it's like beating from my right hip to my left shoulder. He goes, and it looks like your heartbeat is coming from outside of your heart. It's called an ecotopic heartbeat.
Wow.
He goes, so it looks very odd. Now, if you looked at like the up and downs, those all look amazing. But when you like, if you're a cardiologist looking at it, you're like, okay, this looks really consistent, but it actually is like completely, basically backwards or upside down.
Wow.
And he said, let's do this. Let's schedule another one in like 30 days. They get me what's called a Zeo patch, which is like literally nobody under the age of 60 knows what this is, but it's this monitor you wear over your heart. I think it worked for 10 days. And the idea is it measures like with unbelievable data, but also if you feel anything like episodic, so your heart racing or anything, you like push a button on it.
Mm.
So I wore it. And when I went in for my second appointment, I didn't have the results back yet. I went in for my second appointment. And that morning, one of the women in our mastermind, Erin, who does all the somatic work, like somatic attachment and release. And, she also does Reiki and everything. I had just signed up to do a session with her. She offered it to us. It just happened to be the morning of my second cardiologist appointment, like totally unrelated. Mm-hmm. And I literally just showed up and I didn't she didn't ask for like my symptoms or anything, but she was doing some release on me or some attachment work. And she just said, your heart chakra is really blocked. And I've heard that before. Anybody that ever does energy work is like, your heart chakra is really blocked. Now, I mean, you know me, like I'm a very giving, loving person. My tri-type is I'm a, 7-2. I'm warm, I think, nurturing. Like I like to take care of people. But I was like, but it's also about receiving. Like the heart chakra being blocked is blocked from receiving. That's what everyone says, like you're blocking yourself from receiving. But I'm like, yeah, but I'm great at receiving money. Or like, I've had lots of proposals in my life, like I've had boyfriends, all the things. I mean, I love love. And she just said, she's like, it's really blocked. Let me do a little work on it. So she did a little energetic work. This is over Zoom. And then I go like 2 hours later to my appointment. I do my second EKG and an ultrasound. Everything's perfect. And he's like, okay,
What did your
maybe the
doctor
first
say?
one was an anomaly. He was like, maybe the first one was an anomaly. He's like, but let's do a third one when the Zeo results come back. So I go and I do the third one. Now, what I'd like to say is what Erin did, like, it was like getting your back adjusted, right? Like when, but if you have like a pattern of your back being out of place, there needs to be consistency. So I go back for the third one and they have my Zeo data, and the Zeo is like, basically just confirmed everything that they saw in the first one. Like my heartbeat is bizarre. And even though my pulse shows up very regular and I have a great pulse rate, like my resting heart rate is 62. So they're like, yeah, it confirms everything. And there were 3 times during the 10 days I wore it that I had an episode, which looked like racing heart, or like my heart, like almost like restarted. It was like a gap. And then all of a sudden my heart was like, then all of a sudden it was like gap. And then it was like bizarre. But every single time within 1 second, I pushed the button. I didn't realize I did. I didn't remember like, I remember these episodes. It was just like, I felt something, I pushed it. And he's like, so the good news is you're very in tune with your body. And then they did one more EKG, and it was the exact same as the first one. Still outside, the heart is still upside down. So I started correlating it. I'm like, all of these ancestors or these, ascendants of mine who have all of this heart trauma. I mean, literally like death by heart.
Yeah.
Like I have that too, but I am, because of the time, the place, who I am, what I've gone through, I'm now 22 years ahead of where they were. I have like decades to fix this. But what I'm realizing is like, from a health standpoint, they all looked good.
Right.
Right. And so this is not a health thing. This is an energetic thing. In fact, most people with the condition that they had, the mitral valve prolapse, which is what my grandfather died from and my dad had a surgery on, that's actually a disease that mostly affects females, not men.
Really?
Mhm. So what came up for me that I like traced back to that first somatic breathwork experience was I've carried this, but I won't carry it on. That's one of the things, is this heart thing. And that came up in the journey I did as well. Is like, I
Wow.
must heal, or I'm in the process of like healing my heart, not just my heart, but like this pattern, this lineage. And I think I have pieces of where it came from that I shared with you about my seventh ancestor back, my third or fourth great grandmother. I don't know that because it was after that the death record showed up. So I don't have any death records before that,
Yeah.
or at least I don't have
So
any autopsy report.
yeah, wow. Which is so crazy. I mean, like technology is insane. I waffle between so in law school, I took this class called Law, Science, and Technology, and it was all about how we have zero privacy, and the last thing that we have left is our like DNA sequence and like ancestry.com and all of the things at one point in time could potentially like bite you in the ass, as all of the things in
Sell
the
us.
world. Right, right. Which I'm also the same girl that like has clear. So whatever they have, right? But I've never done ancestry.com before, but I'm just like fascinated by what you were able to find and the connections that you were able to make, which is when I think for me, at least, when people will say like, oh, ancestral trauma or like past lives and all of the things, it's like, no, you have actually generations of people and all of the things that they've experienced, both like health wise and energetic wise and spiritually, like all in you. And you have the opportunity to heal those things. And so as we segue into, we went from the breathwork journey to past life stuff. Now, the last time we spoke, you were getting ready to go on a journey. Both of us were.
Yes.
Yes. And I think was yours on Friday or Saturday?
Mine was on Thursday. Though I just had this realization I wanted to say before we dive into, because we're literally diving into the journey, is
Yeah.
I ended up finding my aunt finally. It
Oh,
took
yes.
3 months. And I had this very weird feeling of urgency. Like I was like very drawn. Like I need to find her. I mean, it's been my dad's, I don't know how old, my dad's 67, right? And I knew she was older. And I just had this urgency. And so I finally found her information, but she was an hour ahead. So I was like, I mean, I literally like got the, like paid for like the people finder stuff to find her address and phone number to call her. And it turned out that when I finally was able to call was about a week after I found her info, because I needed to wait till I got my kids down. My husband was traveling, and I called and a man answered the phone. And he's like, "Who are you?" And I was like, "I think I'm Olena's niece." And he was like, "She doesn't have a niece." Anyway, went into this whole weird bizarre conversation. And I was like, "Well, I'm her dad's, I'm her younger brother's daughter." And he's like, "She doesn't have a younger brother." And I was like, "Well, her dad's William Newell." He's like, "No, her dad." And he's like, "That's not her dad." And I said, "Well, I think you think her dad is so-and-so." And I brought up the name that was on her, like basically who adopted her. And he's like, yeah. Oh, how do you know this? Right. And I ended up sending him, because Ancestry, after I found her, my Ancestry information came back. Because 23andMe, I mean, I think that you can connect with the ancestors, but on Ancestry, it shows who is the most connected to you. And the two major connections I had were my mom's sister, who's a half sister. It's like 26 point whatever percent. And the other was this aunt. So it confirmed that this was my aunt, because it showed up that like we were, connected through DNA. But the bigger thing I wanted to share here is this whole experience was so healing for me and my dad, because I was sharing a lot about it with him as it was happening. And, sometimes he was just like, "Oh, it's so cool to find out more about his dad," stuff he didn't know. But what really came out is my grandfather got married at 18 to this woman, the mother of my dad's half sister. And I don't know exactly when he left, because I don't have all those records. Like I never got her. I don't have her birth certificate, but I know. So I don't have anything that shows. I have her marriage records that show her birth date. I ascertained that my grandfather left, or her mom left, when she was about 5. I think it was my grandfather left though, because he went to war and ended up meeting someone and then ended up getting married to that woman years later. But the point here is I was talking to my dad and I was like, Dad, you didn't even know grandpa got married at 18. And then when his daughter was 5, he left. My dad and my mom got married when they were 18. And my dad left when I was 5.
Wow.
And so this, like, it had happened again. This pattern had repeated. But it wasn't a pattern my dad was even aware of. So when we talked about, like, seeing patterns in our parents, my dad never saw this. He wasn't born. But the pattern repeated. And that is when I feel like all of this came together. And my dad said, he's like, one, he apologized, which he'd never done. So we were both crying. He's like, I'm so sorry I wasn't there when you were little. And I wasn't there much. And then he cried. He's like, I wish my dad was alive so I could ask him, like, to understand this.
Wow.
So it's been really healing.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful. I didn't know that part. So journeys.
The journeys.
Last we spoke was, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, week or two ago, we were together. We were both speaking at an event, and we had a speaker dinner. And you told me about this before, about this guy in LA who facilitates a combination of a psilocybin journey and an ayahuasca journey, but pulls out the strain in the ayahuasca that makes you, like, extremely vomit or have a negative experience.
Right.
In that respect. We haven't discussed yet how that journey has gone and to what you feel appropriate to share, because I do know that oftentimes journeys can be so personal on such a deep level. So yeah. Well,
literally the only person I've shared with is my friend who introduced me to the psychotherapist. So a little background. I've heard of ayahuasca for years. I'm not a drug user. I mean, occasionally, like, I'll have a gummy. Those are legal. I don't drink. I'm open. I'm really open to things, but I don't know. I never thought I would ever, like, do something like that. Yeah. I was always drawn to the idea of ayahuasca, except the idea of being sick for hours. And also, like, I've had some people that are like, I had one that was great, one that was terrible. Some people that are like, I'll never do it. We had a friend that did one, and he was, like, not okay for months. And that just level of uncertainty and, like, pain, I was like, oh. Yeah. So it was never something really I looked into. But then Michelle, a dear friend of both of ours, right? She was telling me that she had gotten introduced to someone and she'd gone through this journey, and she was describing it. And I was like, did you get sick? She's like, no. And I was like, did you hallucinate? Because I don't really know that I want to see a bunch of stuff. I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Like, maybe, but anyway, she had several journeys, and it was really incredible for her and her partner. And Michelle is very much like me. Michelle's probably even more, I'd say, spiritual. I think she's created more space to welcome the spirituality, where that's still something I'm in progress on. But her husband, or fiance at the time, boyfriend, is a rocket scientist. It's very much like my
legitimately.
husband. Legitimately is a rocket scientist. And my husband is, like, an electrical engineer, but, like, founded a robotics company. So they're like so engineering. So, like, my husband's a Virgo, like, very in their head. Everything, like, has to make sense. Like, my husband is pretty much an atheist, and I've always, like, I grew up in the Christian church. I'm like, listen, like, I'm just really open. Like, I think what maybe some people, I don't want to even get into that discussion, but I'm just very open. And I'm like, listen, I feel connection, even if we have different things we call it.
Yeah.
And so Michelle told me about this, and it just brought them so close together.
Yeah.
And it helped them see and communicate to each other in a way they could both understand and receive. And they ended up getting engaged after their first journey, because it broke down any remaining walls.
Yeah.
And so I was, like, really open to it. So she put me in touch with her guy, and we were texting, but he's like, listen, I really only do this in SoCal. Like, I don't come up to NorCal. But he said, but I do have best friends up there. Like, who knows, maybe at some point I'll come up. I'm nothing planned. And I was like, okay. But the idea, like, to do a private session, it had to be during the week. And I was like, I'd have to take off, like, a Thursday and Friday and travel. It just seemed like a lot. Yeah. And my husband was kind of like, and so he's working with a therapist. I don't have one right now, but I have, like, 3 coaches. Or, I have a spiritual and, like, all these different things. Yeah. But I had done years of work with therapists. And I asked my husband, he's like, why don't we just do, like, marriage counseling? There's nothing broken, but, like, I like to say our life moves very fast. You have 2 founders in one house. Yeah. With 2 small children, a lot of responsibilities, like, a lot of things going on. And even small speed bumps can create a lot. Yeah. So he's just like, yeah, I just don't think like, he's like, we don't need a quick fix pill. And that's what this sounds like. And I was like, I was smart. I didn't argue. I was like, okay. And then what happened was someone came into my life that was like, I mean, in a really magical way. We met at the park and just were very drawn to each other. And anyway, started chatting. I just like energetically like, oh, this is the weekend before the weekend of the pitch club. So this is like literally days before that speaker dinner. You and I like had that really activated experience.
Yeah.
I came back and the first date, like I'd say date we had, was supposed to be on a Thursday in December. And I was like, I was just at my house. She was just going to come over for lunch. A few days before that, I got a Pure Space message from a photographer that wanted to rent out my house. By the way, I'd listed on Pure Space 2 months earlier, never even had a message.
Yeah.
And long story short, it was for her husband's real estate brokerage, this girl that's coming to my house.
Oh, wow.
Literally, like, and I was like, wait, I know who this guy is. He didn't find the house. It was like, he didn't even know the photographer was reaching out to me.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I'm not going to charge them, but they can use it. So they ended up shooting at my house. And then our first like actual get to know you was that afternoon. And we bonded over the fact she was a stage 4 cancer survivor. And, you know, I lost my boyfriend to cancer, my husband, and we were talking about the work of processing the pain, the PTSD, like all of these things when you go through something like, you know, chronic cancer or like diagnosis. And I said, what have you done? Like, did you do therapy? Like kind of what are your things? Because I felt really actually called to offer her a hypnobreathwork and Reiki session.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, well, I did these journeys and the word, I was like, whoa. Anyways, it turned out in this conversation, she's describing it. I'm like, this sounds exactly what my friend Michelle's doing.
Was she with the guy? The same guy?
She literally, then she's like, well, my Jamie. And I go, wait, Jamie is, who's Jamie? She goes, the psychotherapist that facilitates it. I was like, I pull up my phone. I'm like, is this Jamie? And it was literally the same person. Not only is the person that she's been working with for 13 years, he married her and her husband. They're that close to him. He was their officiant.
Wow. See, so when things like this happen, I'm like in my journey, what myself told myself, I know we both sound crazy right now, but what myself told myself in my journey was that we get these breadcrumbs and you can collapse time, and whatever it is that your goal is or what you're trying to achieve or whatever it is, you can collapse that time if you follow those breadcrumbs more quickly. But sometimes if you don't follow them and you ignore them, then you're getting more breadcrumbs to lead you back to the other breadcrumb to get you back to doing the thing. And it's like, you can have 50 breadcrumbs or just one. It's like up to you to decide. And I'm like, those are your breadcrumbs.
I mean, and they were both like people that like, again, very close. It was so crazy. And then the other crazy part is, so we talked to her and I was like, oh my gosh, well, her and my husband, I mean, her husband and my husband become friends. We did like a couple dinner and they like, now they're going out to dinner once a month. They felt very connected. They're both sons of immigrants. They grew up in the Palo Alto area. They both married older women who had been, you know, I'll just say like we both had history, right? So there was just all of these things that felt like incredibly synchronistic. And so he ended up going out to dinner with her husband and came back and was like, I talked to her husband about like his experience because he's gone through several journeys. Like, and I think I want to try it. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then like, so I texted my friend and like 2 days later she texted, she's like, hey, the therapist, I don't want to use names, but the hypnotherapist, the psychotherapist is coming up. So this guy did psychotherapy for 15 years before finding plant medicine. And he works with a shaman and the very special concoction. And now he only does that. He's like, I literally get people the results of like 10 years of therapy in one session. So I can't ever see going back. That's all he facilitates now. So she texts me and she's like, oh my gosh, he's going to come up to NorCal on 4/21 to do a session with her and her sister. And she's like, he said he'd come a day early if you want to do it. Now, I realize it's 4/20, like that's like hilarious, right?
Yeah.
But I'd had from my spiritual coach, or whatever you want to call her, spiritual person, I had gotten like my natal chart pulled and she does all my like special dates for the year. And on 4/20, it was literally like, let me see if I actually have it up. 4/20, by the way, it's also a lunar eclipse. Something I've always wanted to experience in my home and body is here. I've achieved it. I'm receiving it. It's so exciting and rewarding. And then the next day it's like, everything is paying off. Everything I'm receiving is making me realize how powerful I am as a creator. This is so powerful, so strong. It was just like literally the best 2 days of the year. And it just happened that day. So we did it that afternoon. It was a heart opener. It was a heart opener. And then it was like a chocolate that had ayahuasca, but not the part that apparently makes people like
Purge.
freak out. Yeah. So no nausea, no vomiting. And the heart opener, what it did is help us feel really safe and be in our heart instead of in our heads. So you just have tons of compassion and everything feels very safe. So you don't have fear. There was never a point that I was like, I got emotional a couple of times because of like the beautifulness, but not ever like there, I wouldn't say like, I'm sure shadow stuff came up, but I saw it as like understanding, compassion and acceptance. Nothing felt painful at all.
Yeah. So if you have like, to the extent that you want to share, 2 takeaways from that journey, maybe on your own front, maybe in your marriage, maybe something that you want to make sure that you remember as you, like, what does that integration look like?
The biggest thing that came immediately, like as soon as my husband, like I thought I was going to be journaling, talking, like the therapist is there the whole time. So, or like the first 5 hours. So if you want to ask questions, I was like, I'm going to like go through so much stuff, right? I'm going to be like very much in my, like, get it all figured out, right?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Like we're going to make this going to be so optimized. Brought my journal. And as soon as I dropped in and I could tell my husband was dropping in, I just said, can I just sit and touch you? And so we sat like knee to knee and like forehead to forehead and like literally sat. And I didn't have a concept of time. It turned out we sat like that for hours. But he started having these revelations and like I felt like an unwinding. And he was talking through it and then journaling a little bit through it. And all I did is like I was having my own, but in the moment I was like, all I want to do is literally just hold space and support for him and nurture him and support him through this and take care of him and just like be still and just like literally just like held him and nurtured him while he was going through it. It was amazing. And like the biggest takeaway is he was like, he had some stuff and I won't really share like his, but it was like, go where you're needed. And he's like, my family needs me. That's what he was saying. That his family needs him, but he's like, but our family needs me. And what it was is something that I've like known, but I've like been fighting, which was a softening.
Yeah.
It's not just the stepping into the feminine of like being, I don't know, like wearing flowy dresses, right? Or like listening to music, but it's like actually like I have a just turned 4 and a 7-year-old. And I am building a business that sometimes I work 60 hours a week on. And while I'm very present, I work from home and all these things, but it's like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And what kept coming up is I'm like, because I haven't actually released some of the things around worth.
Yeah.
I'm in such a, even though I don't say I'm busy, like everything I do, I choose to do, everything I do, I love and I'm excited about, but I still packed the calendar. I've packed the life and it comes from fear of what does it look like if I'm not, it comes from fear of like, what if I'm not producing, right? All of these things. And, the reality is we're in like this really amazing place. My husband founded and sold a startup not almost 2 years ago that if I don't need to work. I do it because I love it. I do it because I love the impact. And what just came up to me is like where I am needed, like, yes, I want to create, but where I'm needed is at home. And there was no like, okay, this is what your schedule looks like, which the type A part of me would have been like, instantly revise your calendar, create more boundaries, but what just came up is more of like, this is what it feels like. And I can take 30 to 60 days and like evolve into this feeling. And then my husband, just really like how to support my husband. I like how to like stop defending everything.
Yeah.
Not that we don't have a contentious relationship, but there's often of like, I need to prove this, or like, I'm showing you this, or it just, I feel like everything just melted away. So that was the biggest thing, is just really stepping in. And the biggest part of that is actually the receiving. Yeah. It's the allowing myself to be held, where even though half of everything is mine, it's like, yes, but I don't want to rely on him, or like, I didn't earn it because it wasn't my name on the company. But even though my husband's like, I would have never been able to do this had you not literally been a 95% parent for 4 years while I built this, had you not wifed me, coached me, supported me, like made it all possible, given me the confidence, the pep talks, all of the things, right? And it was the first time I actually was able to feel that.
Wow.
And receive it, and receive the fact that he wants to be in that role. Like, and I had a candle that was burning at the time. I lit a candle and it says warrior healer. And I was looking at it with these 2 wicks. And I was like, these are actually the wicks. You're the warrior, the builder. And I'm actually the builder. And I've been so much in my warrior mode, which is not my natural state, that I have actually stopped doing or constricted, like kinked the hose of doing the thing that I am completely meant to do, which is to heal myself and my generation, my lines, my ancestors, to heal my husband. And I'm not just talking through like potential of cancer. Like the second realization that came up outside of the like be where I'm needed, and where I'm needed is actually for myself, my family first, and everything else is secondary.
Mm-hmm.
But the other part was my husband and I were brought together. He's had thyroid cancer, which is your throat chakra.
Mm-hmm.
And I have heart issues, which is like receiving. And we were brought together because I was meant to show him the permission to like show up as himself. And that's what he's done. We've been together 12 years, to fully step into who he is, to speak his truth, to not be a pleaser. So he's healed his throat chakra, and, you know, knock on wood, it's been 6 years since his last diagnosis, where every time before it was 4 years, it came back. And for him, he is meant to heal my heart chakra of being able to receive and feel fully supported and fully trust.
Wow.
And I will say my HRV, well, it hasn't gone to 100. It has literally, because I was doing so many things for the last year to improve it, and it improved by like 10 to 20%. And literally since the journey, it like went up another 15 to 20 every day. I mean, it is higher. Like I'm consistently hitting higher, like say the top 25% of what I am, even when I don't get a great night's sleep. Like it's just improved.
Wow.
And I feel like myself in a way that I've never felt like. And now there's times that I told him one day I had an event at the house, and I was like, honey, I didn't get a chance to like really sit down and like connect with you today. And I missed you. Where in the past I'm so independent. I'm like, I can travel for 2 weeks. If, you know, we'll text, like I'm good. Like we're independent. Like we love each other. I don't need that in my relationship. Like we don't have to need each other. And I'm like, I don't need you. I choose you. I don't need you. I want you. And I realized that actually in the creation of who we're meant to be, in that evolvement, like we have actually needed each other to get to where we're at.
Totally.
And we actually do need to be in each other's life to fully be who we're meant to be, to create really what it is it's about our children, right? Is to create the safety, the energy, the spirituality, the belief, the household, all of these things for our children, who already I'm seeing some of the patterns physically in them that I saw in myself as a child.
Really? Like what?
My son does a little twitching thing, like, which I used to do. And I had a lot of health issues. Like I had heavy metal poisoning. I had all these things that my parents just didn't understand. So I have literally like, I'm like, I have completely set up his life from every decision, like no food coloring, like no plastic bottle, all of these things to eliminate all of this. And yet it's showing up anyway.
Wow. Which
means that it's not physical, it's energetic.
Right.
My daughter grinds her teeth terribly, which I did. I'm like, she just turned 4 last week. What stress is going on in her body in a family with parents that are present? Like we both work from home, that are connected. We don't yell. I mean, like, you know, listen, occasionally, you know, you raise your voice or you're not your best self, but like there's no quote stress and trauma that's been happening at a big T level, or hopefully even a little T level, maybe a tiny, tiny T level of like, no, you But yet these things are still showing up, and it just shows me that there's still so much work to be done.
Wow. I am so grateful that you even gave us a glimpse into your journey. And I say that with a new level of reverence. I've done 2, while I do microdose, I've done 2 psilocybin journeys. And the first one, we didn't do a heart opener, and it wasn't really ceremonial how the second one was. I think we're getting into our groove of how we want them to be. When I say we, it's my husband and I. And the second one was so intentional, so ceremonial. We had our heart opener and we did all of the things, set the intentions. And I felt like we both dropped in so much and so deeply, and like both dealt with a lot of shadow work that ended up being connected to like us relationally too. And it was like on the come down that I was like, I get it now. I get why when people say shadow work, no one's ever really telling you exactly what the thing is or what's the stuff that they had to deal with or whatever, because it's so deeply personal and so deeply individual that I remember even telling my husband, because we were like sharing with our friends, like, yeah, you know, we're going to be going on a journey soon. And with my therapist, she was like, well, let's wait 2 weeks because, you know, you shouldn't. If you want to be a purist about it, don't smoke 2 weeks before. And my husband and I had just, you know, dabbled in a little bit of weed the night before. So I was like, okay, I'll wait 2 weeks. And So, there was like excitement around it. I told you that I was going to do it. We were going to be journeying around the same time. We were excited about it. And on the come down, as I was like, we were landing the plane, I was like, at least right now, maybe in a book in the future, but at least right now, so much of what we went through together, like, isn't meant for everybody. And it's not even from a place of embarrassment or any of those things. It's more of a place from, I think it feels sacred. I feel like we haven't closed the loop yet. There's going to probably be some aftermath and integration from what we experienced. So I say all that to say, thank you for at least giving us a glimpse into what's possible, allowing us to see you and your vulnerability, your journey, even though we say all of these things and in I'm just calling it the LinkedIn world, but in the LinkedIn world, this all sounds like crazy. But when you look scientifically and see how all of this is actually connected, it's so beautiful. And I'm so thankful to have you on to help paint that breadcrumb journey from breath work to hypno breath work to past life to like energetics and ancestral stuff to psilocybin journey, right? Like, we've been a lot of places just in this last hour and 30 minutes. And I'm so grateful to have like gone on this journey with you.
I love the fact that like we've just connect over this deep curiosity.
Yeah.
But it's curiosity, but it's also a mission, right? And I think mission gets used so often of this mission of like, oh, my mission is to impact. But like, we all have to remember that outside impact only happens when we are able to deeply impact ourselves.
Right.
And this journey, right? The journey of like understanding ourselves and like healing ourselves. Like, once you start the work, it is so rewarding. Mm-hmm. And I definitely think anyone who is either a parent or wants to be a parent, it is better than anything else you can do for your children.
Wow.
It is the best thing you can do for your children, is to have this understanding.
So here's the last question I want to close out on with you, that you bring that up, because when I share with friends, like what we're doing, friends, acquaintances, colleagues, like before I even talked about on the podcast that I was microdosing, like I had been having these conversations with friends and acquaintances, and the friends that I know that do it, there's a handful, none of them have children. The friends that do have children are like, oh, I wish I would have did that before I had kids. I can't afford to do that right now because it's that level of uncertainty. And I'm not by any means advocating that everyone go on these, medicine journeys. I definitely think, like, disclaimer, do it responsibly, find a practitioner that is certified in all of the things. Like, this isn't a solo dolo thing, and I do not condone that at all. But in relation to parenting, you said it's the best thing you can do for your kids. Why was it the best thing for you to do for your kids?
Well, before I answer that, I'll just unpack to like when people say I can't now because of my kids. And there's a martyrdom around that, especially for women. Like, the reality is like if somebody gets sick, like both my kids are homesick today, and my husband, they're all sick. I'm the only one not sick. I move stuff around, and you do anytime someone's sick. We need to not wait until there's like a physical sickness to move the calendar. We have to be intentional about it and carve out the time. And it doesn't have to be just for a journey. It's for whatever, right? It's the reset. It's the be intentional about what we're creating in our life. Like, I get people that are like, oh, can you come to this thing? I'm like, I did my travel plans like at the beginning of the year for the entire year, not to fill my calendar, but because I wanted to be really intentional about like where I said yes and no to. But when we went into this journey, my intention was, it had nothing to do with my children, but I knew my children would benefit. My intention was to deepen my connection with my husband, especially spiritually, to like really give him like that feeling of like connectedness, and to heal anything that came up from my past that was affecting my connection with my husband. Right? And I said, anything else is great on top. What I saw in why we were meant to be together, my role in his life, but in our children's life, in understanding it, and not just understanding, because we understand things with our mind, but to feel it in my body and to know it was truth, and to have him like echo that back to me, is I am just totally clear on how I show up. And the biggest change I would say with my kids is because of my own trauma as a child, I had a really hard time prioritizing my husband over my children. So if my husband, let's say, was grumpy, I would not necessarily back him up. And I wouldn't totally, dismiss him, or I wouldn't throw him under the bus.
Right.
But if my kids needed me, I would always go to, now I'm not saying like they're injured, but if my kids needed attention, I was always giving them the attention before him. And what I realized is that was because I didn't have a model. I didn't have a good model. And we both realized what we want to model and what we require, the two of us, because if the two of us are solid and connected, the kids are going to be amazing. But often we weren't totally aligned and connected. We were like passerbyers, very functional, very much loving each other, but not always in love all the time. And not just our children, but anything that was a distraction would come in the way of us. If we keep our connection as the number one priority, our children naturally benefit to a level that they wouldn't if we were just literally saying putting them first.
Right.
And how he's shown up as a father, even more in the last week and a half, how I've shown up as a mother from a standpoint of nurturing and patience, it's unbelievable. And it's something that you couldn't just get out of a class where you learn. It had to be felt in our bodies.
Wow.
But we are going to do our next journey around our kids. And the last thing I'll just say that came out of it, not during the journey, but in the implementation after, is a few things just with, family life outside of our little immediate family of 4, with our bigger families, that with both of us that could be very triggering in the last week. And that experience and understanding, like, yes, we love and are grateful for our families, and we want to be true to our families and support them on all these things. But there is nothing more important than the 4 of us. And we can't allow the patterns, the behaviors, all of these other things from other people. Doesn't mean we have to ignore it, but it's just how do we come to it energetically? We can't allow that to affect this bubble that is so sacred. Past we have.
Yeah. Wow. That's so special. This is all so special. And thank you for answering that. I had the belief that I was lucky to do this prior to kids because of the same belief that so many of my friends and acquaintances have. And I do love that you mentioned that, because it's just, dispelling that all together. Rebecca, you are amazing. Thanks for sharing your energy with me and on this podcast. I knew it was going to be a long one, and I'm just grateful that we got to sit in this together. I love you so much.
I love you so much. I am excited not even excited. I am open and awaiting what will come and what we're going to learn and share from each other in the future.
Oh, yes. Same.